Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to session 2 together with the Project Restore team. I'm Miriam from Tauiwi, and we're very excited to delve into this next slide, which Jennifer, you might just want to put us on to the first slide instead of this one so we can see your wonderful names. Just a little bit of housekeeping for Zoom. It's a little bit different from the usual Zoom. So to interact with our presenters today, you can use the chat function, which if you go down to the bottom navigation pane, it's the little speech bubble, or the Q&A panel. We will keep track of any of the Q&As that we might miss if you put them in the chat, but if you can direct all of your Q&As into the Q&A box. We're really excited to listen more around webinar 2, but I'll hand it over to Tony to open us up.
Te mihi tuatahi ki te atua, tēnā koutou katoa. Haere mai tēnei rā, tēnei heiki koutou I a tātou e tua maha. Nā koutou e tangi nā tātou katoa, aka ia ki te taha I a rātou. Nō reira, no mai, haere mai. Welcome to part 2 of presentation from Project Restore, which is working with survivors. Ko Tony Lindquist, taku ingoa, maunga rei te maunga, tamaki te awa. My name is Tony, and I've been working at Project Restore for about 12 years. Prior to that, I worked about 20 years for corrections as probation officer, and I worked at Te Piriti Special Treatment Unit working with sex offenders, and I'm a counsellor that has a private practice as well. So I look forward to sharing today's webinar with you. Fiona.
Welcome everybody. My name is Fiona Landon. I'm a restorative justice facilitator and have been for 20 years. I was a founding member of Project Restore along with Jennifer and many others, and looking forward to today.
Kia ora koutou, ko Jennifer Annan taku ingoa. And this webinar is following the first webinar that we did a couple of weeks ago, and in the series of 3. And so you would have had our introductions in that first one. And I recommend that if you haven't watched that, then go back and have a watch of it, and it will help to make sense about what we're going to talk about today. So for those who have seen that one, this is a stepping stone from that. And my introduction for those who weren't here at that one, I have been a crisis counsellor at Auckland Sexual Abuse Help for about 15 years, and in that time I started working with Project Restore along with Fiona and Catherine McPhillips and a range of other people, including Shirley Yulick, who is our researcher, and to develop the Project Restore models, of which we're going to talk about more in depth today in terms of survivor issues and how we work with survivors. So there's a couple of housekeeping things. One is, again, if there's any triggers come for you as we're talking about the cases, know that there's Safe to Talk website you can go to get some support. Tap into your supervisors or colleagues. Self-care is really important. And there was one other thing I was thinking about, but I've forgotten. So that'll come back. So as we move into...
Sorry, Jennifer, I think you were going to say something along the lines of that this isn't a how-to.
That's
restorative justice.
Yes. And it's important to know, and as we go through this webinar, we'll be looking a little bit more in detail, and the purpose of us presenting this is to support those working with survivors of sexual harm to know that this is an option, and these are some of the things that they can expect, as opposed to a training for you to go and do this yourself. It will give you some ideas. As Project Restore is growing, this is a shout out for anybody who might be interested in working with Project Restore, that we're hoping as we grow to take on more staff. So if you're interested, watch out for any advertisements that come through that would come through Tauiwi as well, and the networks, and checking in with our website is another possibility to ask any questions around that as well. So as we move into this webinar, which is focusing on the needs of survivors, and from that perspective, we've got Tony and Fiona to sitting alongside me as I talk about how it is to work with survivors and what their needs are and how to unpack those needs, because they're an integral part of the process for the survivor and keeping them safe and keeping their needs at the forefront. So last week, we talked about the opportunities for survivors, which I'm not going to go over in great detail now, because we've already talked about those. We know that it's not for everyone. And for those that it is helpful for, there's a range of opportunities and things that meet their needs. And we know that it does, because in the many conferences that we've done, we often have people coming out saying, I feel lighter, it feels like I can breathe again and I can move forward. I've got more understanding for what happened, and I can process that, and often with their therapist continue their processing, and it kind of helps to speed up the healing process. So when we're thinking about survivor driven and safe processes, it's important that we keep the survivor in the driver's seat, which is opposite to the criminal justice process, where everybody else is in the driver's seat and the survivor is kind of going along in the passenger seat and sometimes gets thrown out the door. So given that, we're using the therapeutic interventions that trained counsellors have in their toolkit, and working with their support networks, including counsellors, to ensure that what we're doing is working collaboratively and on the same road as the survivor is as she's driving along or he's driving along. Tony, you're going to talk a little bit about challenging the distortions on behalf of the survivor, and would you like to just add a bit there?
Yeah, sure. Part of my role as harmful sexual behaviour specialist is to warm the person that caused the harm up before we get into the conference. And through the experience of working both with sex offenders in probation and at a special treatment unit, what I keep an ear out for is minimisations, distortions, justifications. And right from the first instance when I'm working with offenders, I'm alerted to when I hear those things, and challenging the person that caused the harm is often helps working towards the challenges that that person will meet, or helps reduce the risk of that person minimising or justifying when we get into a conference. So it's very helpful for the survivor that I've done that work with the person that caused the harm, the offender.
And Fiona, you're going to talk about the holding the process from your position, your facilitator position.
Yes, I guess for those of you that know a little bit about restorative justice, when we set Project Restore Up, we made the decision to be survivor driven, which is a different position than most other restorative justice programs would operate from. So that puts the facilitator in a slightly different role of not necessarily being impartial, but being balancing the needs of the survivor against providing a fair process and safe process for everyone.
Can I just add on to Fiona and Jennifer? We work really strongly as a team, and we're all there for the survivor, even though our roles are slightly different in that I'm working with the offender and Fiona's facilitating a process. We're all working to meet the survivor's needs, and they vary on the survivor in each case.
And that part of our process is often felt really deeply by the survivor as we're working with them, to know, and meeting the harmful sexual behaviour therapist or specialist is really important for the survivor to build trust and know that we are working for her or him.
There's almost a fear, Jennifer, that I'm going to be on his side, and it's like
That's
I'm
right.
on the opposite side. And hearing me come from the perspective of meeting their needs actually helps the survivor work through that process.
Absolutely.
So when we're thinking about informed consent, what we're thinking about is every step along the way, we're making decisions, and the survivor's making decisions, and the offender's making decisions about what they want to do next. What are the next steps that are going to help them have their needs met? And in order to do that, they have to have good information and a realistic picture of what to expect. So we're making sure that we're transparent, that we keep people informed, and we're checking in all the way through to ensure that this is something that they want to continue with, and we let them know that at any point they don't wish to continue, or that what we're offering is not going to work, then we look at what else we could do that might meet their needs.
So my role, the survivor specialist role, in terms of how we intervene, both specialists are generally trained counsellors, therapists, have backgrounds in working with survivors or the harm doers, and using those tools that we have in our toolkit. So one of the important things is the emotional attunement that a counsellor has with their clients. So in this role, it's really important that we develop good, strong rapport, relationship, and a caring role, that we start to understand their world. And with that, holding and containing in a professional way, so that we're not going into their world, we are looking and then walking alongside them. And so the reframing of negative constructs is often something as they've come through their journey, depending again on where they are in their healing journey. Often there's a lot of negative messages and beliefs that they have, particularly around the childhood sexual abuse, where they are still sitting with, maybe it's my fault, what did I do? How could have I stopped it from happening? Why didn't I stop it from happening? Another part of my role, the survivor specialist role, is around advocacy and guidance and education. So naming the dynamics that we see and reflecting them back, and the timing and pacing of that is really important, so that we're not overwhelming the person. Because often with both people that we're working with, as the stories unfold and we get more information, more puzzle pieces into the puzzle, we're starting to see a bit of a bigger picture, and sometimes the survivor or the person that's done the harm isn't ready to hear that bigger picture and doesn't see that. So we just have to be really careful with how we work with that. So timing and pacing is really important. And I've utilised the Judith Herman's 3-stage model. I find is a very simple way of talking with our survivors. And the first stage, of course, being around safety, developing safety and regulating emotions and impulses. A lot of anger and addictive behaviours and behavioural issues, self-harming, dissociation are the things that sit with survivors of childhood sexual abuse as they are trying to make sense of their world. So developing safety is really important. The second stage is looking at processing and working through the trauma in whatever way works for the survivor. And if a therapist is going to be helpful for them, is being guided by a skilled therapist. We have many ACC registered therapists in New Zealand, and quite a good, strong support from ACC now in terms of helping survivors through their journey. And the third part is reintegration, and that focuses on reconnecting people with meaningful activities and other aspects of their lives. So when we take that and we think about restorative justice and where is it best placed, so this diagram here is looking at stage 1 is safety and reconnection, stage 2 is emotional processing, and stage 3 is the reconnection. And you can see the wiggly line that goes down. People come in and out of it, so it's not a linear healing model. It's a model that people come in and go back and move between the stages as they go through their healing journey. So when we think about what that means for restorative justice, generally in stage 1 and stage 2 is a very delicate stage, and restorative justice, if it was to be thought about in those stages, needs a much higher level of intervention and support and guidance for survivors by the survivor specialist and the team as a whole. Stage 3 is the strongest place in the optimal timing for restorative justice. So when we're thinking about the referrals and where they come from, the court referrals, we often have people that are sitting more in stage 1 and 2. A disclosure is made and they go through that court process. And when we get those referrals, we'll assess them to see what bit of work can be done if they're interested in engaging in the process, how much can be done, and what is the window of possibility here, and then pace that out. So stage 3, often the survivor is the one that just takes control, is in the driver's seat, is making the decisions, needs much less input and guidance from the survivor specialist. Really important if... Tony?
Sorry, I just wondered if you want to talk about your slower is faster philosophy as part of what you're talking about here.
Absolutely. So on this next slide, when we're thinking about trauma-informed care, it's probably a little bit little there. I'm not sure if you can see easily, but the timeline at the bottom, the sexual abuse occurs, and of course there's major stress and trauma that happens there. So we get a spike up into the explosion zone where the extreme stresses and the acute stress happens at that point. And ongoingly over time, the stress reduces, and when the police report happens, which can be anything from the next day or the next moment to years and years and years, and I've talked with 60, 70, 80-year-olds that never disclosed and have been holding their sexual abuse as a secret to themselves. So as time goes by, we're going to come up and down in that stress, in the stress zones. And what we're wanting to do with our work is to hold people into a stress level that's safe, emotionally safe for them. So as soon as we've experienced the temperature is rising, we will slow the process down. So my little mantra is slower is faster, and it's like working towards training for a marathon. So some people will be more ready than others, so we'll park the people that are more ready whilst we're supporting the other person to be ready. If we move too quickly, that's when the re-traumatization happens, and it's not a pretty sight. Is there anything that either of you want to add, Fiona and Tony?
The only thing that I was thinking as you were talking, and the people listening, I kind of think in pictures a lot of the time, and watching Jennifer is a bit like watching someone play pickup sticks, if people can imagine that, and making sure that you're getting something that's not moving the rest of the pickup sticks, or being very slow and deliberate, and if what you're about to get from the survivor is likely to upset some other stuff, perhaps leaving that till a later date and going to something that's a little bit safer at the time. So that's the picture I get in my head when I think of Jennifer's work.
Thank you, Tony. So we're going to go in a little bit more detail now around the different parts of the process, and we looked at this a little bit briefly last week. So we have the referral intake assessment process, we have the pre-conference assessment preparation, and then the conference and follow-up. So when we get a referral in that first referral intake assessment is what we call it. It can either come from the community, which may come directly from the survivor or the person that's done the harm, or from a counsellor, various other places. Anybody who feels that they would like to come and talk with us about it, we will listen and make an assessment. So in that first assessment, we're wanting to get as much information. So I'm going to talk about the court referrals, and I'm aware that there's probably quite a few victim advisors listening here and other people that may be in that court system. So when we get a referral from the court, it's entered into our database and comes into my little inbox, and the first thing I do is to assess all of the information we get from the court, which generally will be the summary of facts, of what's happened. And sometimes we get the victim impact statement, so we get a sense of how the survivor victim has experienced what happened. We get the criminal history, and if there's anything else that's appropriate that the court have allowed to send on, we'll take those as well. So my first role then is to talk to the officer in charge of the case and get an overview and a deeper understanding of what's happened, and more of a relational understanding of the person that's been harmed and their experience with the person that's done the harm. So we're starting to build up a picture of what's before us, and from that we talk about it in our case review meeting and decide, do we talk with the survivor first, or do we assess the person that's done the harm? And that variable, generally we'll work towards talking with the survivor first in terms of wanting to make sure that there's no safety issues that we need to watch out for. But from time to time, there's cases that are stranger type cases, masturbating in a car, and that kind of non-contact offending, where it's quite useful to be able to know if the person that's done the harm is suitable before we go talking to the survivors, so that we're not offering them something that they are not going to be able to have if the offender is not suitable. So there's a bit of planning in terms of who to call first, and once we've decided to, and we'll get the officer in charge or the victim advisor to check in with the survivors, to invite them to have a conversation with us so that they're expecting a call. And we encourage people to make that invitation such that not explaining too much of the process, and just letting them know that we will explain that when we're talking with them. And getting that engagement with the survivor increases the chance of them being able to take up the opportunity for restorative justice if it's appropriate. So once we've established somebody is interested, then we have the pre-conference assessment, and in that the survivor specialist and the facilitator will attend the first meeting of both parties, both the survivor and the harm doer, individually, in 2 different timeframes. And again, who we assess first depends on what the assessment has unfolded and given us. So in terms of the meeting with the survivor specialist, we're looking for a number of things out of that. And one is to give the survivor information about what the process is. So I'm going to hand over to Fiona to talk about how she would be in that first meeting with the survivor.
So when I'm introducing the survivor to the process, I'm trying to give them a picture of what the process might look like, where it might be, and what the sort of different stages of the restorative justice process is. So we talk about the 3 steps, where we talk about the harm and how it came about. Sorry, we talk about what happened and how it came about, and we talk about the harm, and then we look at ways for people to be able to repair the harm, put things right, and help people move on. And we talk about the ground rules. I go over the ground rules and the voluntariness, so that they can get a sense of this is something that might work for them and their situation, and we get a sense of what we need to do in terms of adapting the process so it's going to more suit their needs.
So my role, following Fiona's and working together, it's a bit like a dance. Depending on the presentation of the person that we're working with, as to whether we do that first or second, or sometimes if we're with a survivor that's more in stage 1 of the healing journey, we may only just make the connection, and then assessing timing and pacing and connecting up with counsellors, with the person's counsellor, to ensure that it's going to be a safe process. So we can do a lot for a stage 3 person, or a little for a stage 1 person, and generally stage 1 and 2 sit the same place with the restorative justice process. And Tony, in terms of, just briefly, in terms of the offender or the harm doer's first contact.
I think I just wanted to mention before that, Jennifer, that often when we're travelling, the three of us will, at the first meeting, the three of us may meet with a survivor. It's kind of a convenience thing, and it's good to have the whole three of us in the room when we're assessing as well. So just mention that aspect of first assessment. When I meet with the offender, look, I take Fiona with me, and I'll talk more about that next week. But again, it's assessing whether the offender is going to be able to meet the needs of the survivor, or how we tailor the particular restorative justice process so both sets of needs are met, holding that we're survivor driven. Did you want me to say more, or is that what you were?
No, that's all good. And yep. Tony will cover off in webinar 3 more in detail about what happened, what work that they do with the person that did the harm. So in the pre-conference preparation, if from the first assessment session we've decided that it's going to be useful for the survivor to proceed, we will then start to nut down and think about, well, what preparation needs to happen to support the person to get there. And the essence of the preparation work, however long it takes, and sometimes it's one session, mostly 2 or 3, and sometimes more. The preparation that needs to be established is, what questions do you have for the person that's done harm? And there's a range of questions that people often ask. First off is usually, well, why did you do it? And why me? And why didn't you stop? Various other types of offending. Are you angry at me for telling? So particularly our young people who have got relationship with the person that harmed them, for example, a father or stepfather, that they have a attachment relationship with, and that they've been an important part of their lives. And have also been told, don't tell. And when it has been disclosed, one of the big things that they sit with is feeling worried that the person is going to be really angry with them and withdraw their care and love. So that's something that we very carefully work with the survivor to pick out what questions that they have. Also to figure with them what they're wanting to say to the person that's harmed them. So like a victim impact statement for the court, we call it more of a conference statement. So people will either, depending on what works best for them, they can write a statement that they read, or just do some bullet points. And some people just want to speak from the heart. So preparation for that, so that when they come out of the meeting, that they've said everything that they want to say, and not think, oh, I wish I had have said this or that. And part of the survivor specialist role is to make some notes along the way, so that that's there as a resource for them, and a bit of a prompter if they forget things, and help them do that. One of the things that we do is to have a meeting. So the survivor specialist at some point in the preparation will go and meet with the harmful sexual behaviour specialist and the harm doer to get a sense of how that person's going to answer those questions. And it gives a sense of that person, and can be able to then reflect that back to the survivor and give them some reassurance or some reality checking about how the meeting's going to be. It's really important that they are fully informed, and that informed consent is every step of the way, so they can make decisions around that. And we often have a difference in what the harm doer has said he's responsible for versus what the survivor has said she or he has experienced. And so it's important that everybody's on the same page with that and agreeing to continue with the meeting. If there's a big difference between those two, sometimes and there's not a willingness for them to hear each other, then Project Restore and our clinical discussions will generally in those cases make a decision not to proceed, because it would not be a safe conference. Part of that preparation is consulting and collaborating with the therapist the survivor's working with, so that we're ensuring that we're all on the same page. And often the counsellor actually attends the conference, which is really helpful. It's a very good resource for the survivor to then be able to debrief with the counsellor who was actually in the room and could see the dynamics that were going on. The other part of the role is...
Sorry.
Carry on, Fee.
Jennifer, just picking up on what you were saying about decisions to proceed, and that's something that a decision that we make together as a team, and all three of us have to agree that it's safe to proceed. And it's also undertaken through our what we call our case review meetings, where we meet with our clinical supervisor every week and discuss all our cases and those decisions about whether we proceed or not, and are discussed with our supervisor and the wider team. And lots of input from other people and lots of discussion occurs as to whether or not it's safe to proceed and what risks we need to mitigate along the way.
Thanks, Fee. So the final preparation meetings, and again, it's how long is the piece of string as to how long it takes to get to conference, is again continuing to work together to meet the survivors' needs, being open. So we're encouraging them to be open to the possibilities. People are often asking, well, what's it going to be like, and is it going to be, or is she going to be like this or that? And so part of my role is the reassurance and taking one step at a time, and knowing that it's a voluntary process, and at any point, if it's not working for them, we can stop. And we talk about that at any point of the process when they arrive in the morning of the meeting. If they decide 2 minutes into the meeting that they don't want to proceed, or halfway through, whenever, we can stop. And that often helps to hold people in, knowing that they can step out. And part of the having built relationship and rapport with the survivor in the preparation is so that they do have some trust and can be held through the process. We talk about the concerns and anxieties and plan for that, and again, having counsellors there is really helpful because they've got already a good relationship with them and can hold them through that process. And then we're ready for the conference. Anything either of you want to add about the preparation stage?
I guess talking about the just moving into the conference, but one of the things, conferences hardly ever start on time. That the anxiety, the nerves often mean we can be up to 90 minutes from conference start, or we all get there, we're ready to go, and someone's not ready to go in. And what we do is we work through that process. So there's no pressure on anyone to have to start at the given time. It's when people are ready. The given time is when we have to be there.
And I talked about the 3 stages just before, where we're talking about what happened and how come it happened, who's been affected, and what needs to be what needs to be done to address the unmet needs that have arisen as a result of the harm done. So that's the focus of the conference. And while we generally flow through in that order, we also go with the flow of what's happening in the room with the people, and sometimes we might leap around a little bit in that process because something comes up and we're running with something that's really helpful. So it's generally linear, but it's not rigid.
Thanks, Pete. So the conference day arrives, and we have staggered arrival times, and sometimes people hurry up to wait, and so we encourage people not to do that, and that's very hard for people. I'm a hurry up to wait person, as my team knows. Drives them crazy sometimes, but so it's useful to we often will bring the harm doer in first, so we've got them in before the survivor arrives, and avoiding that very uncomfortable meeting outside of there's settling time and giving giving time in the separate rooms to start with. And as Tony said, sometimes it can be a short time or sometimes it can be a very long time. It's important to give that time as we help to develop that safety in the room. And for both parties, we ensure that everybody meets everybody, so in our team. So the harmful sexual behaviour therapist would come in and meet with the survivor and just check in and say, is there anything you want to ask me about the work that I've been doing? And building relationship and rapport and trust is really important. And the facilitator will go backwards and forwards in the rooms to do a bit of administration work and filling in consent forms and that kind of thing. But all of that helps to build in terms of trust and relationship and rapport building.
I'm just thinking it'd be quite good to note that how long the conferences can take. So given that we often take quite a while to get into the room and then we often have breaks along the way, we generally ask people to set aside most of a day, and we use as much of that day as we need. And it very much depends on how many people, how much they have to say, and how long we're in break. So we never know how long it's going to take. And what we don't want is a constraint in our time that then means that we can't do the work as fully as needed. So our conferences can be anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 hours from start to finish. And we never know when we're going in. We always think it's going to be shorter than what it is, generally speaking.
Indeed.
And that can be quite, that's a big commitment for parties to put that time aside, but it's also quite tiring. So we have to be conscious of the breaks and in terms of tiredness as well.
So 2 things I wanted to add was one part of the preparation is making sure people have a plan for after the conference. Working with offenders, there'll be a safety thing about not being alone afterwards, not driving a distance, etc., etc. So there's a self-care plan before we go into the conference. And the second thing I wanted to say is conferences happen in a variety of places. If our offender, the person who caused the harm's in prison, a lot of these things that Jennifer and Fiona are talking about are not always possible, or we have to work around prison regulations the same as anyone else. And that may mean everyone meeting in the car park outside. We try and negate those things. It's not always possible. If we're working in a different town, if we're in Wanganui or we're in Palmerston North or whatever, it'll be finding the venue, finding a suitable venue. So there's a whole lot of difficulties that come up before conference day of getting the ideal space or the ideal setting to have a safe and a healthy process.
Thanks, Tony. I'm just going to bring us back, and we're going to move a bit quicker in terms of timing. So you'll see on the picture there's a big room with chairs in a circle. So again, the survivors in the driver's seat as to what that room's going to look like. Some people are happy with a circle, others want a table in the middle. So we work towards what is going to work best for them, and our seating arrangements, we support the survivor to figure out where she or he wants to sit, and then in relation to the harm doer. So sometimes it's directly across the room, sometimes it's slightly off centre, and then we support the survivor to place everybody else in the room. Some people say, I don't care where I sit, but generally when we're sitting down and say, actually, we're going to do this exercise, and just bear with me, they realise, oh wow, that was actually really important to do. So that again sets up the room in a way that they're going to be safest and feel most comfortable. And again, checking the readiness before we begin to have that meeting. During the meeting, part of my role is to observe and monitor the survivor in terms of their emotional well-being and take breaks, suggest breaks. But before, in preparation, we would have talked and empowered the survivor to know when they need to take breaks. So that would be the first step. And the fallback position is if I or their support people notice that perhaps we need to take a break, we'll check in with them along the way. and supporting the survivor to remain open through the process, because often when you're so emotionally charged, sometimes you miss what's being said. So supporting them if they've got notes, just to put them aside so that they can hear the person that's done harm and hear what they're saying fully. And if they're not, we'd stop. So if somebody was dissociating through the conference, we'd stop, take a break, and do some work to bring them back to the present, so that they can be present in the conference. And I often say to people, in terms of using the adult-child metaphor, we want you in your adult brain, in your adult space in the conference. If you revert and regress into a child space, then that's not a good place to be in the conference. So follow-up and monitoring is an important part of the restorative process, because whatever outcomes might be agreed upon, for example, the harm doer may agree to do a treatment program and feedback, give some feedback after that. And if that's not done, then that's something that the survivor will feel duped by. So we look very carefully at the outcomes and make sure they are smart, and follow up. The check-in with the both participants is done within 7 days after the conference, and that from the survivor's point of view, we negotiate that on the day of the conference, just checking out when's a good time. So if somebody is highly vulnerable, I'd probably check in much sooner, maybe the day after, or even later in the day. If they've got high capacity, it's good just to leave that for 5 or 6 days, so that they can have some time to settle and reflect, and make that follow-up a helpful and integrating conversation. And in terms of sentencing outcomes, we'll often check in what happened in the sentencing, and depending on the needs of the survivor, we might have another call after that. Is there anything either of you want to add?
Actually, nothing in particular, but I just remember the days we used to go to sentencing. We used to be in the
Yes.
sentencing.
Yes, as we've grown.
And just about the report, I guess, too.
Oh yes, if you can add that.
So the report that we write is virtually a transcript of what was spoken about in the meeting. So our reports are very long. They can be 12, 20, 30, 40 pages long, depending on how long the conference has been. And we summarise the discussion of outcomes, but we leave intact pretty much word for word what was spoken about in the first 2 stages. And that gives the judge a lot of information that they otherwise wouldn't have about the interactions between the parties. And it also means that we're not censoring or tidying up things for sentencing. So survivors generally really appreciate the fact that it's word for word, and that their voice is heard, and the judge can see the interactions between the parties. And what we've discovered in court is the judge often comments on interchanges that happened in the conference at sentencing, which tells us that they've read it, and that they've really got a real sense of what happened in that meeting. So that process of passing the report to them, they get to check it to make sure that there's nothing that's been misinterpreted before it then gets passed on to the court. And we're talking about who needs to get a copy, and it's a really good record for the survivor to reflect back on over time, when they, because often you forget what happens in the heat of the moment of what was spoken about. So it's a very full account.
Thanks, Fiona. And also, it's a very good resource for parents that are working with young children and young people, and that the young person or the child may not be appropriate to be involved in the process, or even in the full process. So it's a useful resource for the child when they grow up to look back and reflect, when the adults are feeling it's the right time, that this is what happened, and they can read it, in 10 years or 15 years time, if they're interested. So it's a good resource for them. So that brings us to the end of our presentation, and I'm imagining there's a few questions that have come through that Miriam will support in terms of being able to let us know what those questions are.
Yora, so thank you firstly so much. That was really informative, and some of the key points I was taking away was how, in particular, the beginning, Fiona, you were saying for the survivor, if you've seen them and you've heard people say that they can breathe more fully and it feels like a relief, and just thinking of the contrast sometimes of people going through the mainstream court process and what a contrast that might be. So I really took that away and took away how central the well-being of the survivor is in all aspects of your process, and the clinical overview of the whole process throughout each stage is really central as well, and that's maintained in every moment, in particular the attention of the survivor and the affect and how they're coping in every moment. So yeah, great presentation. I'm really excited. There are quite a few questions, so people feel free to add some more into the Q&A box. My first question is, should people try this at home? If there's a couple of therapists and a facilitator, can they rock up and start doing restorative justice?
So I'll answer that one. Okay. I'll answer that one, Jennifer. So we operate under a set of standards that are, have been collaboratively created by us and the Ministry of Justice, and we're accredited to do this work. So this isn't work that a normal, just a standard restorative justice facilitator and a few others might do. And what we've also heard from families is that they've tried to have these conversations within their families by themselves, and it hasn't been successful, and we're often mopping up the start of something that's gone haywire. So having good support and a good process and the right process is really important for the success. It's not just a simple factor of bringing people together and seeing what happens.
And not just the people at home trying to do it themselves. We've had institutions, churches, police who have thought, oh, this is a good idea, and brought them together, and the fallout has been disastrous. So often the survivors are coming to us saying, well, we've had this meeting and survivor issues were not taken into account, they weren't safe, and they didn't get their needs met. So really important that a good, robust process is in place.
And what you can do, that if you know someone that you think would benefit from a restorative justice process, is we have referral forms on our website, and you can go to our website and refer the person to us, and it'll be done by some very professional people.
Right, and that ties me in really well to the next question, which is, does ACC support this session? So I suppose, if you know anything about how ACC does support, but also if there are sensitive claims counsellors out there, how, if they do make a referral, how can they work alongside you, and what works best from your experience?
Yeah, so we've been privileged to have a couple of ACC counsellors working as survivor specialists. So they've brought their expertise into working with ACC, and we've got a bit of a protocol that we give to counsellors at the beginning of the process to let them know what they can apply for, and using the various funding streams for their clients to be able to attend the conference and support people in the pre-conference meetings. So that's worked really well over the last couple of years. We're in conversation with ACC about getting some funding for some of our work, because some of the care work that's required isn't covered under our Ministry of Justice contracts. So ACC is aware of Project Restore and the work we do, and I think that in the years to come we're going to see more and more collaboration with ACC and ACC counsellors. Yeah.
The next question is, if survivors move between these stages, so at the beginning you were talking about the different stages of Judith Herman, does the RJ process ever move them into other zones? So
So what we work very carefully on is that the RJ process doesn't set them back. So if we get somebody that's still finding it difficult to regulate their emotions and still in a self-harming space, we would say, actually, we can't work with you at this point. We would be supporting them to engage with a counsellor if they already if they haven't got one. And then the counsellor, the survivor, would come back to us when they feel more, have developed more capacity and further down their healing journey. If somebody does regress as we're working with them, if we're assessing, okay, we can do this little bit of work and then regress, or slip back into less safe place, we would then stop and park that. So at each step along the way, we're assessing their capacity and what their needs are, and does that meet a safe process? And if it doesn't, we would stop, park, and support them to get the help that they need to be able to then come back.
Great. So you mentioned in your presentation that you do deal with, you take referrals from across the 2 islands. Does it make any difference if you are running the process in Auckland versus outside of Auckland?
I'll answer that one. It does and it doesn't. I mean, we use a variety of technology to make our work affordable. And so we use phone, we use Zoom, we travel. And obviously, if someone was in the same city as us, that would be a much easier process to do more face-to-face meetings in a more timely way. So sometimes we're bunching a bit more work together and doing a bit more in a session than we would do if we had the luxury of more closeness. But we've been working across the country for a very long time, and so we've developed some good processes in terms of trying to manage all the variables. So everyone has access to the service no matter where they live.
We have lots of creative ways of making that happen. And as we grow as an organisation, we're imagining we're going to have team members in many more different spots in New Zealand. And so as time goes by, that will increase, and it'll be good.
We do have a team that is spread around the country already, though. We have at least half our team is outside of Auckland, and 3 in the South Island.
Great. So the next question is around this assessing if the survivor is ready for this process, but it's specifically around how do you ensure that the survivor is not being coerced into attending by others like family members or perpetrators?
Absolutely, and that's something that has to be very carefully assessed. And if it's a court referral, having information from the officer in charge and the victim advisor and any other independent people is really helpful as a starting point, particularly in family violence cases where the survivor often is coerced or feels a lot of pressure to engage in the process. Happens in family sexual abuse cases as well. So that assessment, the survivor specialist assessment of the survivor, building relationship rapport individually with the survivor to really be able to tease out what their needs are and get that clean so that it's not they're not being pressured. And if noticing the pressure, I'll note that. I'll name that and check that out with them. Sometimes people will do the process more because of wanting to keep the family whānau together. And so it's looking at, well, if that's the case, how do we do that safely to ensure that the survivor is okay through the process and is having informed consent.
Jennifer, do you want to just add a little bit to that on where mother and daughters and there's divided loyalties about some of the work Fiona might do?
Absolutely. So regularly, unfortunately, where there's a step parent abuse situation, often, most often, a stepfather to a stepdaughter, or father-daughter relationships where the mother, for whatever reason, has choosing to stay in strong relationship with the person that did the harm, and that puts the survivor in a place of complete tornness, wanting to be supported by the mother, and but also wanting to be angry and wanting to get some justice for what's happened to her. So there's a lot of work that's done in those particular cases in terms of trying to strengthen and support relationship between mother and daughter, which is often the primary wounding, and wanting to make sure that, again, the survivor's not feeling pressured or coerced into doing this, so that the person that's done the harm gets a lighter sentence. Needs to be done for the right reasons, which is healing and recovery for the survivor. Anything you want to add, Fee and Tony?
No, that covers it for me.
And following from that, still around assessment and working with survivors, this is actually for survivors and perpetrators, but we might want to plug all the perpetrator questions for the next one. What cultural assessment frameworks or processes do you undertake with the survivor and their supporters if they are Māori or from other cultures?
So
in terms of for any person, we find what their needs are. So with Māori, what's tikanga that they use, and what is going to work for them. Certainly with our Māori whānau is whānau-centric, and we feel that, and the process is such that we can accommodate whānau-centric versus Pākehā, whereas more individual, and Pacifica as well. So we're looking at what are their needs and how can that be met. So we'll, if need be, have cultural consultation along the way to ensure that we're working within their framework. So it's Project Restore framework is the restorative justice process framework, but we find how that fits with the family whānau. Yeah, is there anything you two want to add?
No, I think that covers it from my aspect. Did you, Fiona?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that that we're also, looking at the context of the harm in terms of other social aspects of their lives and impacts on their well-being. So we're making referrals to other agencies where they have needs. So as we identify the needs, we're looking at what are the needs that we can meet and what are the needs that they have that other people need to meet, and then making referrals, so that might be financial, and there might be other spiritual healing and processes, and there might be other supports. I mean, we make whānau ora referrals where we see them as being something that would be really helpful. So we're trying to engage with agencies that are doing those, providing those services and linking them in. Not always easy to do, especially in small rural towns where there's not a lot of service provision, but part of our collaborating on a local level is very much when we're visiting places to go and meet the service providers and introduce ourselves and find out what services are available.
I think I just wanted to add about the importance. We try and work we can cross-culturally. We talk, consult with Māori or Pacific Islanders. We use interpreters. But what's really important for Project Restore is holding our kaupapa as well. And where, we know our kaupapa works cross cultures, and the importance of working with different cultures but holding our own kaupapa is really important.
And it sounds like you do a very thorough, holistic assessment as you go through the process with all parties involved. This question is around, I suppose, how engaging is this process for survivors? So in particular, have you worked with survivors who are parents of younger children and wondering what pressures this process might put on their parenting capacity?
So that is absolutely part of the assessment in terms of is this something that's going to be helpful for you? Is it, and if it is, do you have the capacity and the interest to invest the time that it takes? Because it is a time investment. And if the answers to that is no, then it would be parked or declined, which in terms of what their needs are. So again, it comes back to capacity to engage in it. And if they say yes to start with and then realise actually it's just too hard and I don't have the capacity, then they can pull out. And that's certainly something that we support all the way along.
And I guess the beauty of our ability to provide the service at any point in the future means that we can park things, and when people do, when they're dealing with things and it's all just too much, they can come back at a later time, and we can do bits now and bits later if we need to. And again, just to add that collaborating with the services when people are struggling with parenting, we'll be linking them in with parenting support wherever possible.
Great. This one's quite a simple question in terms of if the report is word for word, how do you record it? Note-taking will obviously not be sufficient.
No, we actually record the meetings with a digital recorder. And then we have it transcribed. We have an in-house transcriber who just transcribes it word for word. And then the facilitator takes that transcription and turns it into the restorative justice report. So it also includes our questions and our words in the report, not just the words of the participants, because otherwise it wouldn't really make sense, the answers to the questions. Yeah.
And we get written consent before we do it from all the participants.
Graham, that's definitely something I was listening throughout your whole presentation. The role modelling of consent is really strong in your process. Sorry, Jennifer, I cut you off.
No, keep going. It's lost.
Sorry. The last, I'm just going to combine a couple of questions which are around courts. So how do you manage court dates and readiness to conference? Can you ask for adjournments? And what proportion of conferences are held pre-sentence stage? I
can talk to most of that. So we generally always will ask for an adjournment if it's a pre-sentence referral, because it would be extremely unlikely that we would be able to do a referral within the 4 to 6 week time frame that we would normally be given. Some of the courts know our timeframes because they have a lot of work coming through, and they might automatically give us a longer time frame. But generally, we're able to report back to the court within 2 to 4 weeks as to whether we're going to proceed or not. And then we'll either ask for an adjournment, which will be 2 to 3 months extension, or we will inform the court that we can do the process post-sentencing if the court doesn't wish to adjourn it, or the parties don't wish it to be adjourned, which is sometimes the case. In terms of proportions that are done in the pre-sentence space, I haven't got stats on the tip of my tongue as to how much of our conferences are done pre-sentence. I'd say it would be the majority of our work is done pre-sentence. It wouldn't be higher than 60 or 70% though. It would be somewhere sort of 50 to 70% of our cases are done pre-sentence, and the rest would be post-sentence or at some other juncture or without any court reporting.
Can I just add there? I just remembered what I was going to say in terms of the reports to the court and the taping of the meetings. In the community referrals, the survivors can again make a decision about whether they want it taped, as opposed to the court ones where we need to write a report. So there's a bit more freedom for survivors. If they don't want it taped, then or either participant, if they've both got to agree to it being taped. And if they choose not to, then it wouldn't be taped and the report wouldn't be prepared in that case, except for a very short overview of what happened. Yeah.
And my add-on was around part of the assessment process is checking, particularly with the well, not particularly with him, but as part of my role is checking whether the person that caused the harm is willing to do it post-sentence or willing to have a deferment. And I know Jennifer will talk with the survivor about the same. Of course, the survivor holds more weight than the perpetrator in this case. So we consult with the participants.
Hey, the last question, and then I'll hand it over to Tony with the last two questions to do a promo for the next webinar. But the last question is there resistance to the idea of restorative justice in these contexts from the sexual violence sector? So someone watched the webinar last time and talked about it and got some negative responses. What are your thoughts on that?
So my experience from when we first started talking about it in 2004, there was a lot of resistance and a lot of, why on earth would anybody want to do this? You can't create a safe process. It just wouldn't be safe. It cannot be done. And that was from both police, my colleagues that I was working with in the Auckland Sexual Abuse Help. There was no thinking, oh gosh, this can be done. As the years have gone by and as we've developed our processes, more and more people are seeing how it works and seeing that this is possible. And for those that are still sitting with, oh, is this possible? The question I always say first is it's not for everyone. So it's not going to be helpful for every case. And that helps them to put that aside and look at the positives that could be helpful for this target group that it is helpful for. So yes, there has been resistance over the years and it's getting less with education.
And our stats are that our uptake of people being offered the process from referral rate is about 30%. And for people, our conversion rate from once people have moved into the pre-conference phase and started to prepare and sort of open to the idea is about 50%. So there is a big, fall off over from people that have been offered the process that then it doesn't proceed with for whatever reason.
Great. So the last two questions were more around offenders and the consequences if offenders don't follow through agreed actions, and what are some examples of what might motivate a perpetrator to engage with a conference. So over to you, Tony. What's happening next Friday?
Next Friday, webinar 3 at 11 o'clock, we are going to be talking about the person that caused the harm, the role of the harmful sexual behaviour specialist and restorative justice. So we'll go into more depth about what powers we have to enforce things that the perpetrator may say they're going to do and they don't do, and we will talk about what's in it for the harm, or what's in it for the perpetrator, the offender. Why would they want to do this? And I suppose just giving you an insight is that I believe most people have a huge part of them as good, and a huge part of them want to do the right thing. So we will talk in more depth about why they want to do the right thing and perhaps how they can be enticed to do the right thing if they're not fully there. That's all I'm saying.
Fantastic. So
back next week.
That's absolutely fantastic. So in the chat, I've posted the link for those who have not registered already. So it's next Friday, 11 a.m., the presentation that Tony just described. This presentation has been recorded, so it will go live on our YouTube channel, so you can subscribe with the link that I've shared in the chat to get notified as soon as we upload it. But we also will be sharing the PowerPoint and the recording to be emailed to all of you if you have registered. So thank you so much, Tony, Fiona and Jennifer. This has been a great presentation. I'm hearing some messages come through in different parts of the chat and the Q&A box that people have found it really useful. So we will close here. And
just before you close, Miriam, can I quickly add, I'm sure our email addresses came up at the start. Anyone that has unanswered questions, I'm more than happy for them to email me at my...
Tony, we've got the Project Restore. Tony, we've got the Project Restore website, and they can go in and make an inquiry through the website.
Okay, cool. Just so it doesn't leave people with unanswered questions.
Absolutely.
So I didn't want to close with a karakia today. I want to, because next week's a carry on, I'm going to leave that till next week and close appropriately next week. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
Thank you for listening to us today.
Thank you, everyone. Ka kite anō. Go well. Happy level 2, everyone. And we will see you all next Friday.
Ka kite.
Ka kite.
Okay.